go ahead and disconnect the ground terminal on our battery. So go ahead and use our 10mm socket. Loosen that up. I'm going to go ahead and spin that off, set that aside. Let's go ahead and remove the air intake hose here from the throttle body. There's a hose clamp in here. We're going to go ahead and use a flathead or Phillips head screwdriver. Turn the screw counterclockwise. It's going to go ahead and open up that hose clamp. With that loose, we're then going to come on over to this hose right here. Just going to pop this hose off right here. I'm going to use a small pick, and on the mass airflow sensor right here, we're going to pull up on the little safety lock clip, press down on the tab, and wiggle the harness off of the sensor. Pop that off. Now there's 4 T25s Torx screws holding the upper air box together. Let's go ahead and get those loosened and removed. Go ahead and grab the upper box. Pull this off of the throttle body. Go ahead and set that aside. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this hose from the valve cover. And use our pliers, loosen up this clamp, work that back, and then we'll just go ahead and use our pliers, work this hose off. Follow the hose back, pop this out of its retaining clips. It's going to bring us right over to the air filter in the air box base. Now there's a screw right here. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that. This will allow this rubber mount to be released. Now part of the airbox base has the air intake right here. Just going to go ahead and slide this back a little bit. Grab the base. Go ahead and lift the whole unit up and out. On the top here we have 2 electrical connectors you want to go ahead and disconnect. We're going to use a small pick. Just going to press in on the top here. And pull that out. I'm going to do the same for the lower one right here. Actually, we're just going to use our fingertip to push up on the little button, work that off, and we'll slide that. Right here, there's an 8mm screw that is holding this whole bracket assembly to the intake manifold. Let's go ahead and remove that. Pull that aside a little bit. Now on the top of the throttle body, there is another electrical connector. We're going to use a pick. We're going to press down on that little tab right here and work that connector off. Pop that off there and release it from its retainer tab just so that that harness is now loose. And we'll go ahead and tuck that aside. On the front of the intake manifold, we have our oil dipstick tube and its mounting tab. This attaches to the intake manifold, so we're going to use a T25 Torx bit and 1/4" ratchet. I'm going to go ahead, loosen and remove that screw. Now that we have that screw out, we do have that dipstick tube loose. We'll just kind of move that out of the way. Now we have our expansion tank plastic line right here. We're going to pinch these little tabs, slowly work that and pop that out. And we're just going to follow this along, pop this out of its retainer tabs and just set that aside. Underneath the engine on the passenger side, there is a splash shield protecting the belt and pulleys. We're going to use our 27 or T27 Torx bit to go ahead and remove these 2 screws here. We're going to remove the shield. Now that we have that cover off, you can see the Serpentine drive belt right here. It used to be the full width of the pulleys, and it has now shredded and is dry rotted. And the other way we can get this off is to cut it. This does not have an adjuster on here or a tensioner, so we're going to have to use a special tool to install the new belt. So let's go ahead and cut this belt now. You want to wear safety glasses. And then go ahead and remove the belt. And we'll throw this out. Now on your alternator, you have the upper pulley right here. On the bottom side, you're going to have a 15mm bolt that is going to come out towards the passenger side fender. So we're going to use a 15mm deep socket with our ratchet, loosen and remove that bolt. Loosen and remove it. On the top of the alternator, we have 2 pieces of hardware right here holding the alternator to the bracket. There is a 15mm bolt here and a 15mm nut here. Let's go ahead and loosen these. This bolt here is using an E8 inverted Torx. Let's go ahead and remove this bolt next. The reason why we're removing this bolt is that the alternator doesn't come far enough forward without binding up on this stud. So we'll just remove the stud. Now when the stud comes out, we'll go ahead and slide the alternator over to the side. We're going to go ahead and remove the 2 bolts holding the fuel rail. It's 10mm. There's 1 bolt right there, and then there's 1 on the other side of the rail. There's 1 right here. Go ahead and pull these bolts out. And this is just going to allow a little bit of flexibility to separate it from the top of the intake. On the bottom side of our intake, there were two 10mm bolts. This one here is directly below the throttle body. We're going to use our deep socket and short extension. Let's go ahead and loosen that bolt. All right, we'll go ahead and remove that bolt. Then we have our lower bolt on the passenger side section here. I'm just going to break that loose. Once that's loose, we should be able to just connect our ratchet and just zip it out by hand with the extension. And once we get this one out, we'll go ahead and set that aside. I'm going to work on our end here. It's a 10mm bolt, and this is why we had to remove the alternator, was to really get to this bolt here. There's a total of 5 bolts holding the upper part of the intake to the cylinder head, this being one of them. We're going to feed our extension and socket through these 2 runners back to the bolt. And reach underneath the runners. Pull everything out. This bolt is longer than the others, so you want to pay attention to the length of these bolts and what position they come out of. We have one right in the center, down below. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove that one. This bolt here in the very center is a short bolt. We're going to feed our socket and extension through the 2 runners and back to the upper bolt over here. This is another short bolt right here. Now we're going to switch over to a ratchet or gear wrench behind the throttle body. And here is our 5th upper intake bolt. Let's go ahead, loosen and remove this one. Slide that bolt out, and this is a short bolt as well. Then we have this vacuum hose right here. Just going to use a pick and release the clamp itself. Free the hose of this unit. On the other side, there's just a little vacuum line here that's held on by a rubber sleeve. You just work that back and forth. We're going to use our hose pliers and remove this hose off of the intake. I'm going to go ahead and grab the unit, work this up. This is going to give us some access to some other hoses that we want to go ahead and remove. On the bottom side of the intake below the throttle body, there are two hoses. We have a thicker one here with a little red retainer pressure clip. I'm just going to use a pry tool and you go down and apply some inward pressure. And that should release our hose here. So and that'll pop out like so. And the hose beside it actually has a hose clamp underneath. We're going to go ahead and grab some pliers, loosen and remove that. Go ahead and pull this hose off. Just released this plastic hose here. And underneath we just have a wiring harness clip or retainer. We're going to pop that harness free of that intake using our trim tool. Just going to hop on in there and pop that loose. Now we have one of the knock sensor harnesses right here. I'm going to press down on this tab, right on the top, pinch, and pull, separate the harness. Now this harness itself runs underneath our intake manifold, up through a little notch on the back, and then it is bolted right here. This is one of two. The second one is just to the right of it, right here. Let's go ahead and use our 10mm socket, and we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt on this. And remove the unit. I'm going to go ahead and install our sensor. Just going to run it through, and then we'll run our wire down and through where it was before. And then we'll just connect our connector, line that up, press it together, hear a little click. Let's go ahead and snug up the bolt here on the sensor. Just want to snug that down a little bit. That's all. Now on the bottom side of the new intake, we have this little flat tab right here with a couple holes in it. And then we have this stud. Now we're going to install our knock sensor harness. There's two little lock tabs that go into this. And then the harness has a retainer that slips over the stud. Once that's installed, we're going to lower the intake down inside. And then we have our two vacuum ports hoses we need to install here. One hose is a simple pressure fit. You push it in, it locks in. This one here has a hose clamp. So we're going to slide that on, reposition the hose clamp, and lock that on. Let's go ahead and do it. And make sure this plastic vent line is on all the way. Then we're going to go ahead and grab our pliers, reposition the hose clamp. Lock that in place. Now we can go ahead and lower the intake down. We're going to go ahead and install our bolt on the far right side of this intake manifold. It just took us a couple moments to line up that intake. There are a couple alignment studs that just lined up with the cylinder head, and once those lined up, the intake popped right into place. I'm going to go ahead and get the two far end bolts installed, this one here and the one on the far passenger side. So I'm not going to tighten down this bolt, we just want to kind of get it a little bit snug. Let's go ahead and get the other bolt started. Now let's go ahead and install our other far end bolt right here. Just going to get that started, a couple threads, and we'll go ahead and tighten that up a bit. And once this is in, we're simply going to start running. We'll probably install the center one here, the one to the left of it, the one to the right of it, and then we'll get our two bottom bolts installed. Now right in the center of the intake manifold, we have our vacuum hose. We're going to go ahead and install it before that center bolt. It just creates less of a challenge to get that on there. Here we go. To make things a little bit easier for us, we put our bolt on the end of a magnetic wand here. We're going to feed this through into the hole. We're just going to pop that off, and then we'll put our ratchet and socket on in there. And we'll go ahead and start getting that threaded in. Now this is the longest bolt of the entire intake bolt kit. It goes in the second bolt position, so we have the far left one. The second one in is the long bolt. Reach right underneath the intake, insert that, probably get it threaded a few threads. I'm going to feed our extension and socket in. Now that that one is snug, let's go ahead and move over to our other one over here. On this particular bolt here, we're going to go ahead and use our magnetic wand again. Feed it right between the runners. Feed it right through and into the head and pop the magnet off. All right, that bolt is snugging up. Let's go ahead and install the two lower bolts. Now we're going to attach our bolt to our magnetic wand here, and we're going to slide that in here. Get the bolt popped in there, and we'll go ahead and remove this. Go ahead and get our bolt inserted there. Let's go ahead and get our ratchet in there. This last bolt here is probably the most complicated bolt to get to. But all in all, most of these bolts are pretty basic to get to. Not too complicated. Go ahead and snug that down. Now we're going to go ahead and torque all of the intake bolts to 159 inch-pound pounds. And we'll repeat this for all of the bolts. We'll just finish up with our last bottom one and we'll be all set. We'll now go ahead and install our 2 bolts for our fuel rail. Once we have that one started, I'm just going to go ahead and get it a few threads twisted in. And once that's started, we'll go over to the other one. Get that one placed in there and get that started as well. Now we're just going to gently snug this down. Once that screw bottoms out, we're pretty much good to go. We'll go ahead and tighten down the one beside it. Do the same for this one. And it's snug. All right, now we're going to grab our bracket right here, undo our little locking clasps. I want to feed our hose through this. Now the bracket itself bolts to the intake. I'm going to slide that over, grab our 10mm bolt. Feed that down and in. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and lock our hose into place by pinching the hose lock here. So we have our vacuum hose right here. Go ahead and slide this onto the bracket. Like so. Now we have our knock sensor connector right here. Line that up, press it until it clicks into place. We go down to our throttle body here. We have our electrical connector right here. Line that up. Press it right on. And we have the sensor right up above it. Line this up. Press this on. We're now going to go ahead and install our screw for our oil dipstick tube. I'll go ahead and tighten that down. We're just going to snug it down. All right, once you have that snug, it should be all set. I'm going to go ahead and slide the long stud into the engine right here. Install the long bolt beside it. I want to go ahead and make sure that the stud is threaded in all the way. Once that's snugged in, we can now go ahead and install the nut on the front side of it here. Underneath the alternator or the alternator pulley, you're going to see this hole right here. That's where our third bolt is going to go. Let's go ahead and get that installed. With all three bolts started, let's go ahead and tighten them down. Once it bottoms out, another quarter of a turn. Let's go ahead and tighten up that bottom bolt. So once it's snug, another quarter turn, and it should be good. Let's now go ahead and take our expansion tank hose and line this up. And we're just going to gently push this on, and you'll hear the click securing it in place. The hose itself pops into retainers running along the fuel rail. There's one right here, and then there's one forward of it right here. With our old belt removed, let's take the new belt. I'm going to feed this down. And this is what they call a stretch to fit belt. I'm going to feed this around our alternator. These go down around our AC system. Let's go ahead and get underneath the vehicle and finish the installation. Now this here is a stretch belt. It does not have a tensioner or an adjuster that we can use to get that belt on. We're going to go ahead and use this special installation tool. I'm going to put this on, and what we actually have done is we installed the belt on all of our pulleys that are needed. Up top, we're going to go ahead and put our 18mm socket on the crankshaft. So now what we're going to try and do is run that belt on using this tool. So once you get the belt lined up and put on, it's going to take maybe 3 to 5 revolutions for the belt to walk its way all the way on, fit onto all of the ribs on all of the pulleys. You have your crank, your AC or non-AC pulley, and then you have your alternator pulley up top. Make sure all the ribs are lined up. Let's get install our belt cover here and take one of our screws. I'm going to go ahead and get that started by hand. And grab the other screw and do the same for this one here. Once those are in, we'll just go ahead and snug those down. Now, when installing the lower part of your airbox, there are two plastic studs right here. They're actually going to press into two rubber grommets. Let's go ahead and lower this down. Line this up into place. Pop that in, and then we can go ahead and connect our air intake tube right here. That'll snap on. We're going to install our rubber stabilizer clamp right here. Press this down, working that rubber grommet into place. And you're going to take your screw, line that up, and we'll go ahead and screw that in. All right. And then drop in your air filter. Take the airbox cover. While we're lining this up, we're also going to put the intake tube onto the throttle body. Work that into place. Line up the lid, and we'll get our 4 screws installed. Let's go ahead and get our 4 screws started. After we get all 4 of these started, we'll go ahead and come back and we'll snug them all down. Now, when tightening these here, once you feel this screw snug down, you want to go just a hair bit more. All right, now that we have those installed there, go ahead and take your tube right here, pop that into place. Grab your mass airflow sensor connector, line that up. Press that on so you hear it click, and then press the safety lock down into place. Let's go in and tighten up the intake tube hose clamp. Just snug that down. Go ahead and snap that on here. And we'll go ahead and line this up and put this onto the valve cover. We're going to use our pliers and just move this clamp down into place, and we'll get that popped on. Let's go ahead and install our ground terminal right here. We'll snug that down.